The Locked On Podcast Network presents the NFL Big 3 in 30. The three biggest stories in the NFL from our local experts at the Locked On Podcast Network. We bring you the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 30 minutes. The NFL Big 3 in 30 starts now with the biggest story in the NFL.
Baltimore Ravens training camp practice turned somber on Tuesday as they likely went down towards the end of practice.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast.
Training camp continues to chug along here for the Ravens, and we have some unfortunate topics to discuss in the first part of the show as Isaiah Likely, the biggest storyline of practice on Tuesday. He goes down with a lower leg, foot, ankle injury. He gets carted off the field. John Harbaugh gave some updates on that. And then after that whole situation happened, there were conflicting reports and rumblings and the whole 9 yards on Isaiah Likely's contract situation, which we will get into as well. We'll also dive into just general news and notes. Lamar Jackson flexed at Ravens training camp. Underrated receivers continue to do a really good job. Honestly, a lot of positives from Tuesday's training camp. The only problem was the Isaiah Likely injury. So that's going to be the story we talk about right here. Again, Likely carted off the field at the end of practice, one-on-ones. He goes down and was apparently pounding the ground in a lot of pain. John Harbaugh was asked if he had an update and said, quote, "Yes, we'll know more tomorrow. It's going to be a few weeks, though. He rolled his ankle, the foot area, so we'll get an MRI tomorrow and see exactly what needs to be done, but it'll be a few weeks. It's good that it's this early in camp." So, I mean, not necessarily the most encouraging update in terms of Likely missing time. I will say, based off what Harbaugh said, I guess it looks like it's not anything it's going to cost him the season, hopefully. You know, that's the hope. We still don't know, at least at the time of this recording. If you're watching or listening to this after we get an Isaiah Likely update, then obviously we'll know more then. But even so, if this is just a rolled ankle sprain, there are multiple different types. And actually, I wish we had Kadri Ismail here. We'll hopefully have him on tomorrow's episode of the show because he's an expert in sports movement, human movement, injuries, injury prevention, injury recovery. So I had to do my best Q impression here and try to look up some of the different types of ankle sprains and if that is the situation, just to prepare. I don't know what else it could be. Could have sprained his foot. Like, there are a lot of different things that could have happened here. So just in terms of ankle injuries, there are different timelines for recoveries. Mild ankle sprains, which are classified as grade 1, those can heal in 1 to 3 weeks generally. Now, moderate sprains, those are classified as grade 2. Those may take 3 to 6. Now, those severe grade 3 sprains, those are the worst type of scenario. They are extremely serious injuries, and those can take 3 to 6 months to heal, or potentially even longer. And you might even have to have surgery if you have a sprain like that. So just because, you know, it wasn't a knee thing, doesn't look like an Achilles is involved, right? John Harbaugh clearly said he rolled his ankle, the foot area. If it is an ankle sprain, it is better than an ACL. It is better than a ligament injury like that. But the ankle still has ligaments that are involved, and you have to kind of be cautious with that. We saw that Travis Jones suffered an ankle injury last season, and, you know, he never really, like, it took him a while to really get back from that. It was clearly hindering him even when he was back on the field. But I do agree with what John Harbaugh had to say about it happening this early in camp. Right now, today is Wednesday, July 30th. Obviously, the injury happened yesterday on July 29th. There's still a month plus to go until the regular season. So even if it is, you know, grade 2 or grade 3, and grade 3, you're looking at a crazy long recovery timeline. But if it's a grade 2, right, a moderate sprain, based off of the timelines I'm looking at right here, and maybe those who are more well-versed in the medical area than I am can provide, you know, more context, whether it's on YouTube in the video comments or if you're listening in audio form on social media. But if it's that 3 to 6 week range, I'm just going to go in the middle of grade 1 and grade 3, obviously a grade 2. You still have a timeline where Likely can return before the start of the season. And the thing with Likely is he doesn't necessarily need the reps. Like, obviously it helps him. It helps everybody to have the reps, develop even more chemistry. You know, even vets benefit from that. But Likely doesn't need them. He can still, he can miss the rest of training camp, not play a snap in the preseason. He can just come back week 1, and I think he'd be just fine. I think he'd be A-okay if that were to be the scenario. And honestly, I would be cautious if I were the Ravens. There's no need to rush Isaiah Likely back. I honestly don't expect him. John Harbaugh already classifying in his initial update is going to be a few weeks. I'm not expecting to see him for a very long time. Obviously, no preseason. I don't think a lot of the Ravens stars will play in the preseason. That's been how they've operated. Maybe something changes this year. I don't know. But, you just kind of have to hold your breath until the results of the MRI come back, because there are also other things that could happen. Again, I mentioned maybe he sprained his foot. If it, is that ankle foot area, I've had to deal with a couple of those. And, I was in a boot for, 4 to 6 weeks, although mine, I guess, were more on the severe-ish side. But you have to have, I guess, an open mind about what this could be. Could be something where it's very minor. He misses 2 weeks and he comes back and that's good. Could be something more on the major side. But, that all we're doing right now is, I can't tell you what it is right now. Nobody can tell anybody what it is right now. We don't know. So the MRI will happen. We will get the update. If Likely is lost for any period of regular season action, it's a huge blow to the offense. Obviously, you have Mark Andrews and Charlie Kolar, so it's not like you have nothing at the position, but we know that Likely is in line to take on a huge role this season, and in a contract year, that's really big. And speaking of contract years, there were rumblings galore, I guess, on the streets of Baltimore and on the social media waves about Isaiah Likely and the Ravens being close to or have agreed upon, or, this, that, and the other extension. It felt like and his Isaiah Likely extension was very close to coming down the pipeline, according to what multiple different people were saying. And, nothing from the Ian Rappaports or the Adam Schefters, but, it was well, okay, is something happening? I don't know. You're hearing all these people talk about it. All of Baltimore's talking about it. All right. And then this happens to Likely. And then Ian Rappaport goes on NFL Network after the injury and after John Harbaugh gave his updates, and essentially squashed all of that and was no, that's not what I'm hearing. This is what I'm hearing, and it's not that. He said, quote, "My understanding is things are not close, far apart. A deal is not imminent." Ian Rappaport was very clear. He said that, the sides have been talking, and that isn't the communication is there, but from what he is hearing and his understanding, he does not think something is happening soon, while a bunch of other people are saying, yeah, something's going to happen soon. So very conflicting kind of trains of thought here. And I guess sources, one school is going to be right. The other school is going to be wrong. I don't know which one it's going to be. This episode is coming out at 6 a.m. on Wednesday. Maybe a deal is done by 8 a.m. on Wednesday. And of course, it probably will be with my luck. And if it is, I will clip this up right here. I will play it on the show. I'm not saying one is right or one is wrong. I just don't know. I really don't. But of course, how it always goes, at least for me, is the Ravens, they like to operate on a schedule that is not convenient for me and just announce every single move when I'm not available. So I'm just going to expect that's going to happen again. But again, I have no idea what's going on with Isaiah Likely. Obviously, I think this has been sparked by the fact that Jake Ferguson of the Cowboys, he signed his contract with the Cowboys a couple of days ago. And that deal itself was, $13 million a year. So that slots him in right between Cole Kmet, who's making $12.5 million, and David Njoku, who's making $13.7. Mark Andrews is after that, the next one with $14 million. So feels like at this point, Isaiah Likely will surpass Mark Andrews, or at least tie Mark Andrews for average annual value. I'd expect Likely to want a 3 to 4 year deal. I think for Likely, he might want 3. The Ravens might want to get him locked in for 4. So again, it's really important that the Ravens get a couple of guys signed to extensions before the season. Likely would be a great option. I think Lamar Jackson's a great option for that. But obviously, I think we're all waiting and seeing the news for Isaiah Likely, hoping for the best here. But, it stinks that stuff like this happens in training camp. Every team goes through it. Luckily for the Ravens so far, at least until Likely went down, they didn't really have a ton of that. Jalen Davis left practice. Bill Alcone left practice. But Isaiah Likely certainly significant if he has to miss any regular season time. So hopefully that is not the case, and he just has to sit out some practice time, and we'll be good to go by the time the regular season rolls around.
We've all been there, locking on early and waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show you've been dying to see. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping. That's where Gametime comes in. Gametime makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. Prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime, and you can save up to 60% off with killer last-minute deals. Tired of endless scrolling, trying to find the best deal? Gametime Zone Deal picks the best seats in your section for you. And with Gametime, the price you see is the price you pay. No hidden fees. Take the guesswork out of buying concert and show tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, the lowest price guaranteed.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast.
The injuries keep piling on, and that's where we start with Maxwell Hairston, who is the latest Buffalo Bill to get injured, and we don't know the status, but it doesn't look good. Of course, the Bills' first-round pick, Maxwell Hairston, a corner out of Kentucky. He had what Dane Jackson described as a non-contact freak slip-up during individual drills. The training staff came over to Hairston. They tested out his knee. He was eventually able to get up and walked off with the assistance of the trainer. I guess the good news there is that he wasn't carted off, but it certainly doesn't look encouraging. Taron Johnson said after practice that the team had a team prayer for Hairston. So we'll hold our breaths and we'll see what happens here, but it certainly looks like Hairston may have suffered a significant injury. And as I've said before, and I think many have said, it looks like Tre'Davious White is going to make this tough on Hairston to be the starter across from Christian Benford. But obviously that becomes even more complicated for Hairston if he's not available, right? He's not going to be able to win the starting job if he can't perform and he can't be on the field. And so we'll wait and see what the diagnosis is here, but optically it gives you plenty to be concerned about. Now, the other side of that is Tre'Davious White has had a really, really strong training camp, and even a healthy Hairston, I think, was going to have quite the battle to unseat Tre'Davious White opposite of Christian Benford. And I think the concerns with Tre'Davious White when the Bills signed him is that you just didn't really know exactly what to expect for a guy that, of course, had some great years in Buffalo, but his last two were full of injuries, right? Significant injuries, an Achilles and an ACL. And then he plays last season the first 4 games with the with the Rams, and they said, thanks for everything. You can go try to find some other team. And then he goes to the Ravens and winds up having a role in their dime package. And he actually played reasonably well and gave you some hope that maybe he can fill a depth role for the Bills or some other team. But now he's in the driver's seat to be the starter across from Christian Benford. And look, Trey's had a good camp. There's no question about it. The technician that he's always been is showing up. He looks like he's fairly bursty. He's making plays on the ball. He's highly competitive. He's doing everything you would hope he can do. But the concern is this is a player that if he's the starter across from Christian Benford, you're talking about a 19-20 game run that the Bills are trying to go on this year. And he hasn't done that in a long time. So we'll see how calloused up he is. I mean, he looks good for now, but what can he offer this team over the course of a 19-20 game run this season? I think, we have a lot to find out. And obviously the concern with Hairston is significant. This is a first round pick and he might lose his entire rookie season. We'll see how that goes. But obviously not an encouraging development for Maxwell Hairston. So beyond Trey White, of course, the Bills do have Dane Jackson, who's a cerebral vet that started a lot of games for the Bills. Jamarcus Ingram is still part of this mix at outside corner. He's a player that obviously has kind of paved his way with some practice squad years and then being on the roster last year and filling in a number of roles defensively in the secondary, plus offering some special teams impact. And then Dorian Strong, who's a day 3 rookie. I like Dorian Strong, but it's, we have to be honest. He's a day 3 rookie. We have to keep our expectations appropriate there. So I think the Bills entering camp had corner as probably the most complete depth chart, right, top to bottom, but it changes fast, right? And now your prized first-round pick that had so much excitement, you're wondering what his availability is going to be, not only right now in camp, but, how long this is going to linger for. I thought it was a good day for the Bills defense overall. It was a practice where the emphasis was 3rd and longs and 2-minute drill. And I thought the Bills defense really won the day more than the offense, where the defense continues to showcase itself with a lot of the wrinkles that you would expect from Ryan Nielsen, a new member of this defensive coaching staff. And the Bills were dialing up the 5-man pressures like crazy, just like they have all camp long. And of course they're going to rush 4, and then they're sending a corner, like a slot corner usually, or a linebacker. And you're seeing a lot of disruption and a lot of chaos. This certainly looks like a defense that is not going to play on its heels. That's going to be very attack-oriented and force the issue. You can kind of get an idea for what they want to be defensively. And I thought today on the 3rd and longs and the 2-minute stuff, you really saw an aggressive style of defense that caused a lot of problems for the offense. And I thought you saw the quarterbacks, including Josh Allen, like eventually just start to really take checkdowns, get the ball out of their hands quicker, because the defense was really, really forcing the issue. So it was definitely a day where the defense had more of the standout moments. I do want to call out a few players that I thought looked really good. Joey Bosa, he has not played a ton of team reps. He did get some teamwork this practice, and he had a clean win against Deion Dawkins for what would be a sack against Josh Allen. Of course, there's no actual sacks in training camp. They're not tackling quarterbacks, but it was certainly an impressive rep against a high caliber tackle in Deion Dawkins. Ed Oliver continues to make his presence known. He was really good yesterday in the run. It was a run heavy day today. You could see him, getting to be more of an attack player, and he was able to really be disruptive. And you could sense he's got a lot of energy with how he's competing out there, and you can't miss his impact. He had a big time tackle for loss and several pressures. I think Greg Rousseau has been terrific. These 5-man pressures really put a guy like him in a good position to maximize his skill set, because he's such a power player that can compress the width of the pocket, and you can really tap into that bull rush and that length to be able to disrupt and compromise the width of the pocket. And I say the same thing about AJ Epinesa. Both guys have been pretty disruptive. Rousseau's been getting his hands on a lot of footballs, batting them up the last couple of days. And so really cage rushing well and affecting these quarterbacks. Shaq Thompson had a sack today, and I'll tell you what, don't sleep on Shaq Thompson. I know we didn't know what to really think of that signing in June as a guy that's on the wrong side of 30 and back-to-back years of season-ending injuries, right? Was it a broken fibula and an Achilles? Like some significant injuries. But he's looked really strong, especially for a guy coming off of an Achilles on the wrong side of 30. You're seeing him, of course, with Terrell Bernard continuing to miss time, getting opportunities with the first team, and whether it's making plays in coverage, as a blitzer, sniffing out the run, Shaq Thompson has had a really, really good start to training camp, and certainly feels like he's going to have something to say about this linebacker depth chart when the Bills have to set their 53-man roster. Matt Milano's been terrific. He was terrific again today. I want to talk about him a little bit more later in today's podcast. But one more thought on the defense is the young defensive lineman. I know that everyone's hungry for thoughts on Deion Walker and Landon Jackson and TJ Sanders. And here's what I can tell you. They're getting a lot of reps. They're all getting off the ball hard. They're hard charging. They're playing with physicality. They're playing with great effort. But, I get one look at these plays from the sideline, and I want to be really honest about what I tell you. And while I am paying a lot of attention to them, I don't know that I have a sample size big enough right now for me to say, hey, these are the techniques that they're working. This is where I think they can make an impact. They're on the field. They're getting opportunity. They're playing hard. But I still think there's more to learn before we start to say, yeah, I think they're on a good path, or, they're struggling or whatnot. I want to make sure that I feel good about that. So I'll pay even more attention on Thursday and, of course, at the Blue Red on Friday. But, I'm paying attention, but I want to make sure that I have good information to share with you. I'm not trying to skirt around it. I'm not telling you that they're looking bad. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying I'm paying attention, but I need to see more to really have an understanding. But I'm really pleased with how they're getting off the ball, how they're being physical, how they're playing with great effort. But, I want to feel a little bit more comfortable before I go in on any stances regarding those players.
Ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year.
The Jets fix one of their biggest problems by bringing back an old friend.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast.
There was a major Jets move on Tuesday, and it addresses one of the biggest question marks on the team. The Jets have a new kicker, and it is a familiar name. Nick Folk is returning to the Jets. Aaron Glenn announced the signing after the Jets training camp practice yesterday. The Jets, it seemed like this offseason, were heading for a bit of a youth movement at the kicker spot. Greg Zuerlein was let go after a shaky 2024 season where he was injured. Jets brought in a couple young guys, Harrison Mevis out of Missouri, who we discussed a few weeks back with John Miller of Locked On Mizzou, and Caden Davis, who the Jets brought in out of Mississippi. A couple young, inexperienced guys, but most reports suggested that these young kickers were kind of struggling in the early days of training camp. So back to the Jets comes Nick Folk. Nick Folk was the Jets kicker for 7 years between 2010 and 2016. And he was a guy who was a really solid kicker for the Jets, made some huge kicks that won games for this team. Some very memorable Jets victories Folk was in the middle of. He made a chip shot in Indianapolis in the wild card playoffs at the last second to beat the Colts in one of the Jets' most recent playoff wins. Then the next year, week 1 against the Dallas Cowboys, he had a 50-yard field goal late in the fourth quarter that produced a win. A couple of years ago, another opening day, he made a long field goal to beat the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a game I was at, a very memorable game. Folk was a very solid kicker. He's been a very solid kicker in the NFL for a long time, and he is back with the New York Jets. And if you look at the statistics, Folk has been one of the best kickers in the NFL the last 6 years. In fact, over the last 6 years, he's made 91% of his kicks. It's not that common to have that record of success over that long of a time frame. Sometimes what you see in the NFL is a kicker has a hot year, and maybe for 1 year he's over 90%. If you take all the kicks Folk has attempted in the last 6 years, he's over 90%. So yeah, he's 40 years old. There's always a risk when a player's that age, no matter the position, that you could see a decline. But if anything, Folk has gotten better with age. He's gotten more consistent with age. And the Jets, I think, no longer have a question mark at the kicker spot. Now, I think a lot of the concern about the Jets entering the season with inexperienced kickers was probably overstated, because you see it all the time in the NFL. Young guys step up and kick and become successful kickers. You know, just because you don't have experience in the NFL doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a failure. But the other aspect of this is what we saw play out. You know, if you have some young kickers who are shaky and you don't like them, there's always a quality guy with experience who's available. You see it every single year. Some kicker gets hurt in season, and there's an experienced kicker who's a free agent who you can bring in who will stabilize things. And that's what happened with the Jets. I think they probably weren't comfortable with what they saw in the early days of training camp from Davis and Mevis. So they said, you know what? We got this guy who's been a long-time kicker in the NFL, a guy who's been very successful, and a guy who's kicked his best the last couple of years. I mean, the first thing that jumped out to me when the Jets signed Folk yesterday was that he's 40, but it doesn't look like the age is really affecting him at this point in time. And I think that at this point, you'd have to say Folk is going to be the Jets kicker. Unless he loses the job, this is no longer an open competition. The Jets have decided they're going with experience at the kicker spot. They tried out the young guys. They didn't feel that confident in the young guys. So let's just play it safe. Let's bring in the solid veteran. And this was one of the things like I could never understand when Joe Douglas was the GM. Finding the kicker is like the easiest thing in the world because there's always a guy available. And Douglas always went with these inexperienced guys who had these huge legs instead of just finding the solid veteran who could provide stability. And the new Jets regime, Aaron Glenn and Darren Muji, again, they tried out the young guy. They tried out the young guys, and maybe it didn't pan out the way they were hoping it would. So they bring in a quality kicker, a proven commodity in Nick Folk, and a guy who's popular. I said this a couple weeks back when I was speaking with McGregor Wells, my friend, and we put together the All Jets quarter century team. Who doesn't love Nick Folk? Guy who was a rock solid kicker for this team for a long time. Good to see him back in the Jets uniform. In fact, during some of the last couple of years when the Jets have been shaky at the kicker spot, Folk's been available. And I've asked many times, why did the Jets not just bring Folk back? If he's there, if you know him and you know he's going to do a good job, the common sense move is to bring him in. And it seems like the Jets have followed the common sense move. Now let's move on to our weekly mailbag. Thanks so much to listeners who sent in questions. I'm going to begin with a question that was submitted last week by Dan, which I did not have time to get to, but I thought it was a really good question, so it's worth exploring. Dan wrote, my main source of pessimism about this regime is this. Why did Dan Campbell not retain Tanner Engstrand as his offensive coordinator after Ben Johnson left? This seems like a red flag to me. How concerned should I be about this? Well, in situations like this, I think you should always keep an eye on it. But I don't think it's necessarily a disqualifying thing that Dan Campbell passed over Tanner Engstrand when the Detroit offensive coordinator job opened, because you never really know deep down what the dynamics are. I think that if you took that logic, you would say the Jets should never bring anybody in from another team because the other team didn't want the guy. Sometimes this does have significance. You know, a year ago when the Jets signed Tyron Smith from Dallas, everybody was celebrating it because the Jets got what seemed like a great deal. They were giving Smith minimal guarantees. But there was part of me that wondered, wait, the Jets really aren't paying Tyron Smith that much. Why would Dallas just let him go? Why would Dallas not give him that contract? What do the Cowboys know? And as it turns out, the Cowboys knew Tyron Smith was clearly breaking down. He was on the downside of his career, and his best football was behind him. You know, if you go back 9 years to 2016, the Houston Texans picked right in front of the Jets in the second round. Bill O'Brien was their coach at that point. Bill O'Brien was running the Texans, and Houston passed on Christian Hackenberg right in front of the Jets, and then the Jets picked Hackenberg with the next selection. At that point, you had to wonder, wait, what does O'Brien know that he's not even picking the guy he coached in college? And the excuse given at the time was, well, the Texans gave Brock Osweiler a big contract, so you couldn't bring in Hackenberg. I mean, that was the excuse people gave, that the Texans signed Brock Osweiler. As we know, O'Brien knew something. But it doesn't always pan out this way. And one of the things I looked into was what Dan Campbell said when he hired John Morton. I tried to find out if there were any clues that Campbell left behind. And what I found was that there actually was one. Campbell mentioned that John Morton was on Detroit staff in 2022. And he, in particular, talked about Morton being kind of a mentor to Engstrand. So I think it was a case where, based on what Campbell's saying, it was kind of a case, do we go with the mentor or the protege? And they ended up saying, well, Engstrand's good, but Morton was his mentor, so let's just stick with the mentor. It's not always the case that you pass over somebody because you think he's no good. Sometimes you have a coach you'd be perfectly happy with as your second choice. It's just there's somebody who fits what you want to do a little bit better or has a little bit more experience. The other aspect of this is we don't really know what was going on behind the scenes in Detroit. You know, it's also possible Engstrand wanted to come to the Jets. You know, some maybe he really connected with Aaron Glenn. Maybe, you know, sometimes what happens is a guy's a hot coordinator and he knows he's going to get a head coaching job, so he starts securing commitments in advance. It's possible last year in Detroit, Glenn went up to Engstrand and said, "Hey, I'm going to be a head coach next year. Would you be my coordinator?" And it's also possible Engstrand wanted to do it because the Detroit offensive coordinator job, in some ways, is attractive, but in other ways, it's not, because in Detroit right now, the perception is that Ben Johnson was kind of the driving force behind that offense. So in some ways, if the Detroit offense succeeds this year and you're the coordinator, people will say, well, he was just doing it with Ben Johnson's players. If you fail, people will say, well, he's no Ben Johnson. Whereas you come to the Jets, you have an opportunity to kind of run your own offense. You have a chance to build your own reputation independent of Ben Johnson. So, you know, there are lots of different possible explanations. I think it's a concern to a degree, but I don't think it's the type of thing that should be overriding everything else. You know, there are certainly plausible explanations that I've just laid out. And the big thing is, just because Engstrand did not end up as the Detroit offensive coordinator, that doesn't mean that he's necessarily a poor poor coordinator in his own right. So, you know, we'll wait and see. What I will say is that I'll ask myself, what did I want the Jets? What sort of coordinator did I want the Jets to hire when they brought in Glenn? I want a young guy who has cutting edge ideas. And Engstrand was on the Detroit staff, a young guy, an up-and-comer in the league, who was part of one of the most cutting-edge coaching staffs in the league. So hopefully he'll be able to implement those ideas with New York. You know, I think it's a factor, but I don't think it's the type of thing that should lead you to panic.